everyone, and welcome to the very first in the 2016 Holistic Creative Guest Series. And this year it's going to be fun. We're going to have a little bit of variation. There'll be videos like we've done before in the past couple of years. We'll have some audios as well, and we'll also have some guest posts this year. And today I'm super excited to welcome our first guest for 2016, Melissa Harris, artist, teacher, guide, intuitive. Melissa, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. And Melissa is one of our new featured teachers for Spectrum 2016 this year, one of the 20. So if you would like, or if you are in Spectrum, you can get to know her and work with her that way. Or if you'd like to, of course, there's that option. And so that's where our connection comes from at this point, is I invited her to teach and she said yes. And I'm very, very excited about that. She's going to be bringing a workshop called Finding and Maintaining Creative Inspiration, which we all can use at times, that's for sure. So, Melissa, I have 3 questions catered just to you for today's chat. And the one I want to start with is more about your personal creative practice, because you've been an artist a long time and an intuitive a long, long time, right? I think so many of us can say like lifelong, right? And then I want you to speak to a time in your life and your creative practice where you personally experienced firsthand that connection of creativity or your creative practice and creative expression and healing. So is there anything that jumps to mind with that? Or
Let's see, I want to make sure that I'm understanding the question exactly how you're asking it. A time in my life where say it again.
Where you personally experienced the connection between the creative process and some sort of healing for you.
Oh, God, yeah. Okay. So I think I would start by saying that during my childhood, there was a lot of, let's see, to put it mildly, ruckus in my household. And it was disturbing to me, as it would be to any child. So my way of escape was with my crayons. And I would take my crayons and go outside. I was always outside doing my little drawings and, drawing butterflies as they were passing by, or cats or whatever. And so I think that for me, that was the first connection. And then that just stayed with me. And then there was a period during my probably late teens, early 20s, where I was really working with my artwork in a very intense way. And when I have workshops here in the studio, people oftentimes are embarrassed to show paintings of pain or depression or anxiety. And that's when I pull open my flat files and I show them these paintings that I did. Actually, if I had known we were going to talk about it, I would have had some by me. That are really, looking at them now, could be a little scary. I mean, people have come to know me through my positive, uplifting greeting cards and the beautiful little airy-fairy and butterflies, and that's what people want in a greeting card. So they want these beautiful pastel-y, uplifting images. But in my own process, I really did use my artwork to let out any kind of feelings that I needed to, and it was my saving grace. And I can say right now, this is going off on a little bit of a tangent, but one of my close friends slash students is going through a big healing crisis in terms of not being able to fully function in life due to some mold and chemical issues, not able to work, but she's able to make her art. And that is really what's saving her. And just, she's making more art now than she ever did because she needs to. She has to use it as an expression of her pain. And these little, oftentimes they're small. Mine weren't. Mine were big paintings. But they're small, and she's doing them daily. And I think it's just so healing for her. And it's a beautiful process to watch. And sometimes, I don't know if another audience might find it painful to look at these. I don't think so. I think that when I've shown my own to my students, they look at them and they have a sort of a breathe a sigh of relief, sort of like, wow, I'm not the only one who has these feelings, and it's okay to show them. So I'm all for that.
Oh, I love that. I love so many things you said, so many important points in that. I love the first point about how when you were a child, you just kind of naturally and intuitively reached towards something that gave you a safe place, a safe place to be okay. And I think so many people can relate to that. And then this piece you're sharing about so important on so many levels about art and creative expression being where we can release the pain. And personally, I don't know that artists talk about that enough. And I think it's really important, particularly in the kind of work that you and I both do with people with creative practice, that exactly what you're saying, they need to feel that sense of connection, even in the pain. And like you said, like your work on greeting cards, people want certain types of things, and it's light and abundance and joy, and of course these things that we want to amplify in our lives. But sometimes what I have found anyway, personally speaking, is that to get to that place, you have to get that other stuff out. You have to have the outlet for that too, whether you ever share it with anybody or not. And then sometimes the sharing can be cathartic as well in a deep way. Um, so thank you for sharing that. You really articulated that beautifully. So
Oh, and thanks for bringing up that last piece too, because yes, I do believe also in spiritual practice that we have to clear the quote negative. None of it's really negative in my opinion. We have to
yes,
clear that before we can get to the positive, before we can get to the light. We have to go through the darkness. And
yes,
some people believe they can skip that step. In my experience, I don't think so.
yes,
But yes, so after I have done a piece like that, or after my friend has done her piece, we just is like, that feels so much better just to have it out. And another thing that I wanted to add to that in terms of the healing and the making the art is that for me, actually just looking at the colors puts a smile on my face, and
yes,
feeling the texture of the craypa or the watercolor or whatever it is on the surface, there's something so yummy about that. And especially if people out there, I mean, for me, oil painting is very sensual. It's like
yeah,
butter, and
yeah,
so, and if you get the expensive oil pastels, you can get that same feeling. And that for me is also very healing. So
yes.
just wanted to pop that
I
in there.
love that you threw that in too, because I feel the same way. The kinesthetic of it, the literally tactile in it piece that takes us even out of this very verbal language, conceptual, trying to process things by analyzing it, and gets us right into that moment. Like for me, it's a presence work. It's that same sort of
Yeah.
work we do in meditation. Even is just getting into where we are right now, right here. And
Yes.
so beautifully put. I'm so glad you took a moment to add that. Okay, so my next question, for me, I see it as related, but it's shifting gears just a little bit. Is you have you have training as an artist, and you do intuitive art, and you are an intuitive. So, can you talk a little bit about how you blend, because this is tricky for a lot of people, I think, how you blend the technical skill or the art training and still let through the channeling of the intuitive into the piece when you're creating. Is there anything you can speak to that, or anything that's coming up around that?
Gosh, that could be a very long conversation because a few things are coming up. I always tell people when they're learning technique, sometimes we move back and forth and it's a juggling act because when we're learning technique, we're really focused and we're really in that left brain. And it's a little bit hard to let through what's going to come, what needs to come through. But once we have the skills, then it can flow through us much easier. And so, this is also a topic that I like to talk about. Like, do you need to study art, or can you just be self-taught and experiment? And I think either is valid. However, if someone that passes through my studio comes through and they are really frustrated because they can't make a fairy or they can't make a person or a horse or whatever it is, then I say, if you're really at that place where it's really important for you to be able to draw, then go learn and draw. The energetic will come back through. I have a particular person that I work with that I'm thinking about, and so much energy and vibrance in her. It's like her touch to the surface, but she's stuck with the technical and can't draw, and sometimes that gets in the way. So she may take a break and say, okay, I'm going to go and learn the skills. And then I say to her, don't worry, don't really get caught up in that, because what you have inside of you is always going to channel through. You'll never lose that. It might be a little bit more difficult for some time to have that energy flowing through, but it's always going to be there because that's you. And what I love about the art making process, I really get a kick out of watching people's styles. It's always there. Their stamp is always there in the beginning.
Yes.
And they might go off a little bit, try a different style, look at another artist for a while, but their stamp is always going to be there. And I work myself in so many different formats. I have a whole body of work of just cats. I have figures and landscape. I have just landscapes. I have intimacy, sacred erotic. I have funky. I have so many things. But, people have come in here and said, I can look at any of your work and know that it's yours. And I say, wow, how could you? And it's just a feeling. It's an energetic that moves through a person,
Yeah.
because that's them. That's their energy. That's their stamp.
Yeah. Oh, again, you just touched on so many golden nuggets. You are so articulate with this. I love it. And I think that that's just such a huge take home point, is because so many people fear losing or not finding their style or their voice or their signature, but it's always there. And
Yeah.
and that's the beauty. And maybe that's something that those of us who've been doing it for some decades can really see and feel. I know for me, I didn't always feel that way. But then I began to see it, in my own work. It just took some time, and it took some awareness work too. And some, almost for me in my own healing process was like letting up on being so hard on myself was a big piece of that for me. And then to go, oh my gosh, wait a minute. I do have this style, this touch that's purely my own. And I'm like you, I am very eclectic in the way I go about it. And yet it's all still there across the board. And I also love what you said about if somebody's doing intuitive work, if somebody does that kind of work and they never feel like, if they never feel that drive of like, oh, I can't make this happen, well, that's fine. That's great. That's where they are. But sometimes people get to that creative tension point and it actually becomes a really awesome place of growth for them if it's truly from that point where they're like, oh, now I really am kind of inspired and driven to go learn some of this technical stuff or this skill piece. And then, like you said, then it just comes back in and it all feeds together and integrates, I find. And it's a really exciting process to do that kind of dance, between. So
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to reiterate what you said about everybody does have their own stamp. It's just there. And people might not be able to recognize it. I can see it pretty, maybe it's like two or three paintings it'll take, and I can see it. And it just grows and grows and sharpens, and it's such a beautiful thing. I never want people I never encourage people to paint like anything, because we should all paint like ourselves. That's the beauty of it.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. And as a teacher, isn't that just for the teachers out there too? I mean, that moment when you see someone get that little aha between like several pieces they've done, like that's why I'm so big on practice. Like, do more than one, do several, put them all out in front of you, because you're going to see that something's clicking inside of you. Or there'll be one when you're in the process and something clicks and you can see that little spark of aha. It's like if you're with them in person, you can see it go off for them. And sometimes I swear you can see it in the piece too. It really comes through. And it's just teachers, I think that that's just like such an awesome thing to be able to be witness to, and sometimes to
So
help guide through. Yeah.
were you meaning that you encourage people to do like maybe the same what do you call project more than once, or is that what you're saying? And
Well,
then
for me as a teacher, I think it depends on the person and it depends on the context. I think it's very individualistic. Sometimes that's exactly what one person would need, and sometimes they just need to be all over the board and experimenting in all kinds of different ways. So I'm kind of like really lenient in that way, just in that I think it has to be very individualized. for each person.
Yeah, and it also can vary in different periods in our lives because I think
Yes.
when you said that, it ticked off something in me that I thought to mention, which is that early on I still am an expressive painter, and I would do a 6 foot oil painting in a day, and I would never want to touch that subject matter again because to me it was done and finished. Now I have a whole nother approach and I like to try it several different ways. So I'm finding that it's important to me because I can be a very fixed person. So it's important for me to open up and say, oh, yeah, well, maybe I could try it a different way. And maybe it would look good small, and maybe it would look good in a different medium.
Yes.
And that's one thing I love to talk about too is how our personalities get so blended. They are as you know we are so as our art because I can be very fixed. I've gotten much more flexible in later life, but people who I see come through and they really want to control. It's such a good learning arena. Our art making process is such a great learning arena for letting go and opening up and not being so stuck on having control. Don't you find that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think to me that's like the biggest healing balm there, is because when we can let go of that, I was a nurse for a long time, so I'm always thinking like reducing stress, like reducing
Ah,
anxiety, like bad stress, reducing anxiety in that way. What is that normal for you? What is that place that brings you to a sense of harmony? Is how I like to think of it. And so yeah, yeah, absolutely. Very good point. Okay, so my next question, this comes right off of something that you share on your, I think it's your about page at your site. And I love this because I know that this relates to a lot of people in my audience, and I'm certain a lot of people in your audience too. When you were younger, you were always told you were too sensitive. And this obviously has become, I think a lot of artists feel this way. A lot of creative types have this experience. But I want to know if you have any tips for those who can relate to this on how to manage the outside noise or effectively channel and tap into and celebrate that sensitivity, either in their creative practice or in their life or however that comes up for you right now.
uh, that is a long conversation too. Let's start with in their life, and then we'll go to their creative process. In their life, I have found that really sensitive people, this is something that you mentioned, I think, maybe within the first couple of minutes about self-love. You said something about that, loving ourselves. And I find that for most people, that is really something that we all need to continue to practice. So if we are so sensitive, then things are going to affect us more than maybe your average Joe walking around on the street. So we have to make sure that our ego is as intact as possible, and that's a big practice in itself. But if we bring in the self-love piece, that is a really big aid for keeping ourselves calm and more tranquil. I really enjoy doing inner child work. If something has upset me to a deep degree, then I will work with my inner young Melissa and do what I can to keep her soothed. Also, because of my sensitivity, I do work with protection tools if I need to. I did live in New York City for a long time. I lived in Paris, and the crowds are really hard for me. So I do surround myself with light. I don't want to get into too much woohoo, or whatever they call it, but I do work with those things.
Yes,
And
they can be
if I
very
need
effective.
to,
Yeah.
then I could work with crystals or different protective spray mists. So, all of those things. That's a big conversation there, sensitivity. And so I feel like I take a particular care with myself and try to be as self-aware as I can. And if I feel particularly vulnerable or sensitive and I've been invited to a party, it might not be a time for me to be out in the world.
Right.
So I'm try to be as self-aware as I can. And in terms of the creative process, You know, we are all so hard on ourselves and we are all so critical. And when people, especially in the beginning days of making art, if they can't have something that they're creating look like they want it to, then they will get upset and maybe enough to not even go back to the surface again or whatever, if it's three-dimensional, whatever medium they're working in. And so, again, I think that takes some awareness and consciousness to say, okay, well, maybe this doesn't look like how I want it to look now. Doesn't mean I'm not a great person or I'm not a good artist or I'm worthless or, going to any kind of a shame place. We have to be vigilant about how we are seeing ourselves in the world and to keep bringing it back to a place of self-love. And that is really, really simplifying a
Yeah,
big
well,
answer.
and I see a beautiful connection between the life stuff you shared and the creative practice stuff you shared. At least it's coming up in my mind because I know a lot of it is like allowing ourselves to be a beginner again and again and again. But also, what you mentioned about doing inner child work, that can be a huge piece in the creative practice too. If, we can just let that wonder part of us come up. So maybe not like the tough, deep inner child work, but more of that what's it like to feel like this curious, inner, free, uninhibited inner child piece. And we let that come into how we play when we're starting out making art. I mean, heck, I still need to do it after years and years and years and years. It's like I have
Oh,
to consciously go there sometimes to break that barrier of just getting started, And
absolutely, yeah. And I know so many people. Most people in this class in Spectrum are doing this journaling work, and it's just such a perfect venue for doing that kind of wonder work.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Melissa, thank you. Oh, that was such good insights. And so, is there anything that you would like to share with people about where they can learn more about you or particular things that you have out there that you would like to let them know about?
Sure, yes. They can find out anything on my website, which is
And we'll put a
www.melissaharris.com.
link. Yeah.
And then I am teaching workshops that combine spirituality and art, and I'm doing them all over the country. I have a Reclaiming the Goddess watercolor pilgrimage to Southwest France coming up this October. And that's going to be really, really juicy. I'm very psyched about that. That's the land of the Magdalene and the Holy Grail and the Cathars and where the Black Madonnas were found. So I'm very excited about this. And let's see, I also do spirit essence portraits remotely and in person, various locations, which is a combination of a psychic reading and portrait. And that's about it. I'm pretty eclectic mix. And of course, I have different card decks and greeting cards and prints. So anyway, I welcome you to visit my website and see those things. And I really appreciate your giving me this time for the interview. It was wonderful to speak with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So glad you were here with us. I feel all inspired now too. So
Me too. I'm looking at your drawing behind you. I love it. Makes me want to go paint. It
thank
does.
you. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in this time. And thank you again, Melissa. Bye bye,
Oh,
everyone.
bye.